The prairie stretched endless under a merciless sundust, devils spinning lazy circles where the horizon blurred into nothing. Samuel Hayes pulled his gelding to a halt, leather reins slick with sweat in his calloused hands. Something had caught his ear, a sound that didn't belong to this god-forsaken stretch of nowhere between settlements. Not the cry of a hawk or the rustle of sage grass, but something human, fragile, desperate. He'd ridden this trail countless times, hauling supplies between towns, his wagon empty now, save for the weight of routine. But the sound came again, thin as a dying breath, and Samuel felt his chest tighten with recognition. Someone was hurt. Bad. Dismounting, he followed the sound past a cluster of weathered rocks, where the trail bent toward the creek bed. What he found there stopped him cold. A woman lay crumpled in the dirt, her calico dress torn and bloodied, dark hair spilled across her face like spilled ink. A kitchen knife protruded from her side, its wooden handle slick with blood that had baked black under the sun. She couldn't have been more than 22, her skin pale beneath layers of dust and grime. When she heard his footsteps, her eyes fluttered open gray as storm clouds wide with the kind of fear that came from knowing death was close. "Don't," she whispered, voice barely audible. "Don't pull it out, please." Samuel dropped to one knee beside her, his shadow offering the first relief she'd felt in hours. Up close, he could see the shallow rise and fall of her chest, each breath of victory she was barely winning. Blood had pooled beneath her, soaking into the thirsty earth. "Easy now," he said, voice rough from years of speaking only to horses and wind. "I'm not going anywhere." Her fingers clutched at the dirt as if trying to anchor herself to life. "They said I was nothing," she gasped. "Said the world was better." A coughing fit seized her, flecks of blood on her lips. Samuel's jaw clenched. He'd seen cruelty before, but this leaving someone to die slow and alone under the desert sun, it made his stomach turn. His eyes swept the surrounding area, noting the boot prints in the dust, the tracks leading back toward the main trail. Whoever had done this hadn't bothered to hide their work. "What's your name?" he asked, already working his arms beneath her shoulders and knees. "Elena," she breathed. "Elena Martinez." "Well, Elena Martinez, you're not dying out here, not on my watch." She tried to shake her head, tears cutting clean tracks through the dust on her cheeks. "Better if I do. Save you the trouble." Samuel lifted her with careful strength, feeling how light she was, how little remained of what she must have been before the world broke her down. "That's not your choice to make anymore." His horse stamped nervously as he approached, nostrils flaring at the scent of blood. Samuel gentled the animal with low words while settling Elena across the saddle, her body limp but still breathing. Each shallow gasp was a small miracle. The abandoned shepherd's cabin lay 3 miles north, tucked into a fold of hills where winter winds couldn't reach it. Samuel had sheltered there before during storms, knew it had walls and a roof, maybe even some supplies left behind. It wasn't much, but it was better than leaving her to die under the open sky. He rode carefully, every jolt of the horse drawing a soft moan from Elena's lips. Her head lolled against his chest, and he could feel the fever starting to build in her skin. Time was running short. "Stay with me," he murmured, though he wasn't sure she could hear him anymore. Just a little further. The cabin appeared through the heat haze like an answer to a prayer-weathered gray wood-sagging porch, but solid enough. Samuel dismounted and carried Elena inside, the air cool and dim after the blazing sun. He laid her on the single cot in the corner, noting how still she'd become. For a heartbeat, panic seized him. Then he saw the faint flutter of her eyelids, heard the whisper of breath between her lips. Still alive. Still fighting. He knelt beside the cot, studying the knife. The blade had gone in clean, missing vital organs by what looked like inches, but moving it would likely kill her faster than leaving it alone. He needed fire-clean water, something to stop the bleeding when the time came. Elena's eyes opened, focusing on him with effort. "Why?" she whispered. Samuel met her gaze, seeing not just pain there, but genuine confusion, as if kindness were a foreign language she'd forgotten how to speak. "Because somebody should," he said simply. A single tear slipped down her cheek before her eyes closed again. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, promising rain that might not come. But inside the cabin, something had shifted. Two strangers, bound now by choice and circumstance, facing whatever came next together. Samuel rose to build a fire, his mind already working through what needed doing. The knife would have to come out eventually. The fever would get worse before it got better. And somewhere out there, the men who'd left her to die might decide their work wasn't finished. But those were tomorrow's troubles. Right now, Elena was breathing, and Samuel was determined to keep it that way. The fire caught on the third strike, flames licking hungrily at the dry kindling Samuel had gathered from the cabin's corners. Elena stirred at the sound, her eyes finding him through the growing shadows. The fever had taken hold now, painting her cheeks with unnatural color, while her body shivered beneath the thin blanket he'd found. Cold, she whispered, though sweat beaded on her forehead. Samuel moved to her side, pressing the back of his hand to her brow. Heat radiated from her skin like stones left too long in the sun. He'd seen fever take men during the war, watched strong soldiers waste away in field hospitals. But those men had doctors, medicine, hope. Out here, he was all Elena had. I need to clean the wound, he said gently. It's going to hurt. She nodded, biting down on her lower lip until it went white. Samuel heated water in a dented pot he'd found using strips torn from his own shirt to make bandages. When he began cleaning around the knife's entry point, Elena's back arched off the cot, a scream tearing from her throat. I'm sorry, he murmured, but didn't stop. The wound was angry and red, infection already creeping in around the edges. If he didn't act soon, fever would finish what the knife had started. Through gritted teeth, Elena managed, tell me something, anything. Help me think of something else. Samuel paused in his work hands, steady despite the tremor in his voice. I had a sister once, Maria. She could sing like an angel, make even the meanest horse gentle, just by humming to it. But what happened to her? Cholera took half the town that winter. He resumed, cleaning his touch, careful but thorough. She was 17, had plans to marry the blacksmith's son, wanted children, a little house with flowers in the window. Elena's breathing began to steady as she focused on his words rather than the pain. You miss her. Every day. Samuel rinsed the cloth in the hot water, pink swirls of blood spiraling through the clear liquid. She would have liked you, I think. Had a soft spot for strays, things that needed mending. Is that what I am? Elena's voice was barely a whisper. A stray? Samuel looked up, meeting her eyes in the firelight. You're a woman who deserves better than what this world gave you. Something shifted in her expression, surprise maybe, or the first fragile stirring of hope. She watched him work in silence after that, her trust a weight he felt in his chest like a stone. As night deepened, Samuel fed the fire and prepared a thin broth from dried meat he carried in his saddlebags. Elena managed a few spoonfuls before exhaustion pulled her under. Samuel settled into the rickety chair beside the cot, his rifle across his knees, ears tuned to every sound beyond the cabin walls. Near midnight, she began to dream. Her body thrashed against the blankets, words tumbling from her lips in Spanish and English both. Samuel caught fragments, names of men pleas for mercy, the desperate bargaining of someone who'd learned early that survival sometimes required surrendering pieces of yourself. Por favor, no, she whimpered, tears streaming down her fevered cheeks. I'll be good, I promise, I'll be good. Samuel reached out, covering her hand with his own. Elena, you're safe. You're here with me. Her eyes snapped open, wild with terror, until they found his face. Samuel? Right here. She gripped his hand like a lifeline. Don't leave me alone with the dreams. I won't. He meant it. Through the long hours until dawn, Samuel kept vigil, his presence an anchor against whatever demons haunted her sleep. When fever made her delirious, he bathed her face with cool water. When nightmares came, he spoke her name until she found her way back to the present. By morning, the worst of the fever had broken. Elena woke with clear eyes, studying Samuel's face, as if seeing him truly for the first time. He looked haggard, beard stubbled, dark circles under his eyes from the sleepless night. You stayed, she said, wonder in her voice. Told you I would. She struggled to sit up, and Samuel moved to help her, noting how the simple movement left her breathless. The knife still jutted from her side, but the skin around it looked less angry than before. The men who did this, Samuel said carefully. Do you know them? Elena's face hardened. Settlers from Millbrook. I worked in their saloon, served drinks, cleaned rooms. When the owner's son tried to force himself on me, and I fought back. She touched the knife handle gingerly. They said I was uppity, needed to learn my place. Samuel's hands clenched into fists. He'd known men like that, men who saw kindness as weakness and cruelty as strength. They have names. Why? So you can get yourself killed too. Elena shook her head. They'll come looking when they hear I'm still breathing. Men like that don't leave loose ends. As if summoned by her words, the sound of hoofbeats echoed across the prairie. Samuel was at the window in 2 strides, peering through gaps in the weathered shutters. 3 riders approached the cabin, dust trailing behind them like smoke. They found us. Elena breathed terror creeping back into her voice. Samuel checked his rifle, then moved to the door. Stay down. Whatever happens, don't make a sound. But Elena was already trying to rise from the cot, her face pale with determination. I won't let you face them alone. You can barely stand. Then I'll die on my feet. She met his eyes and Samuel saw steel there. He hadn't noticed before. I'm tired of running, Samuel. Tired of being afraid. The hoofbeats stopped just outside. Samuel positioned himself by the door rifle ready, while Elena gripped the wooden cross that hung from her neck, the only thing of value she had left in the world. A voice called out rough with mockery. We know you're in there, girl. Come on out and maybe we'll make it quick this time. Samuel's jaw clenched. Through the gaps in the shutters, he could see them clearly now. 3 men in dusty clothes guns, drawn faces hard, with the kind of cruelty that came easy to small minds. She's not coming out, Samuel called back, and neither am I. Right on. Laughter answered him, cold and mirthless. That your choice, stranger, dying for a worthless Mexican whore. Samuel felt Elena flinch behind him, but when he glanced back, her chin was raised in defiance. Whatever these men had done to break her spirit, it was mending now, piece by piece. My choice, Samuel said, his voice carrying across the prairie like a promise. And I've made it. The silence that followed stretched taut as a bowstring. Then gunfire erupted, bullets splintering the cabin's walls, and Samuel knew the time for words had passed. Gunfire shattered the morning stillness. Samuel threw himself sideways as bullets chewed through the cabin's weathered walls, splinters exploding like angry hornets around his head. Behind him, Elena rolled off the cot with a cry of pain, the movement tearing at her wound. Stay low, Samuel shouted, levering around into his rifle's chamber. He crawled to the window glass, fragments cutting his palms, as he peered through the shattered opening. The 3 riders had spread out, taking cover behind rocks and scrub brush. Professional in their movements, these weren't drunken cowboys looking for trouble. They were killers who'd done this before. Give us the girl. The voice belonged to a tall man with silver hair and dead eyes, clearly their leader. Last chance before we burn you out. Samuel's response came in the form of a rifle shot that sent the man diving for cover. The bullet sparked off stone where his head had been a heartbeat before. The other 2 opened up with pistols, forcing Samuel to duck, as lead whined through the air above him. Elena had pressed herself against the far wall, one hand clutched to her side, where blood was seeping through the makeshift bandages. The knife had shifted during her fall, and Samuel could see fresh crimson spreading across her dress. How many bullets, Hornaz? She asked through gritted teeth. Samuel checked his rifle, then the pistol on his hip. Not enough for a long fight. She reached into her boot and pulled out a small derringer, its silver barrel gleaming despite the tarnish. 2 shots. It was my mother's. Can you use it? Elena's smile was sharp as broken glass. Try me. Outside, the shooting had stopped. Samuel risked another look and saw the men moving closer, using the cabin's blind spots to advance. Smart. Patient. The kind of hunters who'd run their prey to ground before moving in for the kill. They're closing in, Samuel muttered. Elena struggled to her feet, using the wall for support. Blood loss had left her pale, but her hands were steady on the derringer. The back window, Samuel nodded toward the rear of the cabin where a small opening looked out on the creek bed. Too small to climb through, but we might get a clear shot. They moved together, Elena leaning heavily on Samuel's arm. Each step left bloody footprints on the dusty floor, but she never made a sound of complaint. Whatever softness these men had tried to beat out of her was being replaced by something harder, more dangerous. At the back window, Samuel could see one of the gunmen creeping through the tall grass, pistol, drawn, thinking he was approaching unseen. Samuel raised his rifle, sighted carefully, and squeezed the trigger. The man spun and dropped, his scream echoing across the prairie. One down, Elena whispered. The remaining 2 opened up with everything they had, bullets hammering the cabin from front and back. Samuel grabbed Elena and pulled her to the floor as the air filled with deadly lead. A slug burned across his shoulder, drawing blood, but missing bone. We can't stay here, he said. They'll rush us when their friends stop shooting. Elena pointed toward the cabin's stone fireplace. The chimney, I'm small enough. Samuel stared at her. You can barely walk. But I can climb. Her gray eyes blazed with determination. Get me up there. I'll drop down behind them while you keep them busy from the front. It was insane. Suicidal. The kind of desperate plan that only worked in dime novels and fever dreams. But looking at Elena's face, Samuel realized she'd already made her choice. These men had taken everything from her, once her safety, her dignity, nearly her life. She wouldn't let them do it again. "All right," he said, "but you wait for my signal. Don't try to be a hero." Elena managed a weak laugh. "Too late for that." Samuel helped her up into the fireplace, his hands strong and gentle as he boosted her toward the chimney opening. She was lighter than she should be, all sharp angles and stubborn will. The knife in her side made every movement agony, but she bit down on her cries and kept climbing. "When you hear me shout, now you move," Samuel said. "Not before." She nodded, already disappearing into the sooty darkness above. Samuel watched until he couldn't see her anymore, then turned back to the windows. The shooting had stopped again. In the sudden quiet, he could hear voices conferring outside, the two survivors planning their final assault. Samuel positioned himself by the front door, rifle ready. Through the cracked wood, he could see movement in the brush. They were coming. The door exploded inward, kicked off its hinges by the silver-haired leader. The man charged through with his pistol, blazing his remaining partner right behind him. Samuel's rifle barked once, catching the second man in the chest and spinning him around. But his shot went wide of the leader, and suddenly Samuel was staring down the barrel of a .45 Colt. "Should have minded your own business, stranger," the man snarled. That's when Elena dropped from the chimney like an avenging angel, soot-blackened and bleeding, but very much alive. Her derringer spoke twice in rapid succession, both bullets taking the leader in the back. He stumbled forward, his own shot going wild, then crashed to the floor and lay still. Samuel caught Elena as she collapsed, her strength finally giving out. Blood had soaked through her dress, and her face was gray with shock and blood loss. But her eyes were bright with triumph. "Is it over?" she whispered. Samuel looked around the bullet-riddled cabin at the three dead men who would never hurt anyone again. "It's over!" Elena's grip on his hand tightened. "I want to live, Samuel. After everything they did, everything they took from me, I want to live." "Then we'll get that knife out of you and make sure you do." The knife came out with a wet sound that would haunt Samuel's dreams for years to come. Elena's scream echoed off the cabin walls, her body arching against the pane before going limp on the blood-soaked cot. For a terrible moment, Samuel thought she was gone. Then her chest rose with a shallow breath, and he released his own breath he'd been holding. "Stay with me," he murmured, pressing his hands against the wound to staunch the bleeding. Hot blood pulsed between his fingers, and he could feel her life flowing out despite his efforts. Elena's eyes fluttered open, unfocused with pain, but still aware. "Am I going to die?" "Not if I can help it." But even as he said it, Samuel felt doubt clawing at his chest. The blade had gone deep, possibly nicking organs he couldn't see or repair. Without a doctor, without proper medicine, Elena's survival would depend on will alone, and even will had limits. He worked through the day and into the night, cleaning the wound-changing bandages, forcing sips of water between Elena's cracked lips. Fever returned with a vengeance, making her delirious. She spoke to people who weren't there, relived memories that made her weep, called out names in Spanish that sounded like prayers. On the second night, her fever broke like a storm passing. Samuel woke from an exhausted doze to find Elena watching him, her eyes clear and alert for the first time since the shooting. "You look terrible," she said, voice hoarse but steady. Samuel rubbed his stubbled jaw, realizing he hadn't shaved or properly slept in days. "You don't look so good yourself." Elena tried to sit up, winced, and settled back against the pillow Samuel had fashioned from his saddlebags. "The men outside, are they really dead?" "Dead as they'll ever be." "Good." There was no mercy in her voice, no regret. These men had tried to break her, to reduce her to nothing more than their victim. Their deaths were justice, not tragedy. Samuel brought her broth made from the last of his jerky, watching as she managed a few spoonfuls before exhaustion overtook her again. But this sleep was different, peaceful, healing rather than feverish. Her breathing deepened, color returning slowly to her cheeks. Over the next week, Elena grew stronger. She could sit up without help, take a few steps around the cabin before needing to rest. The wound was healing cleanly, pink scar tissue forming where the knife had entered. She would live, Samuel realized with relief, so profound it made his knees weak. "What happens now?" Elena asked one evening, as they sat by the fire, her head resting against Samuel's shoulder. It was a question he'd been avoiding, though it pressed at his thoughts like a sore tooth. The dead men outside would be missed eventually. There would be questions, maybe a sheriff, possibly more trouble than either of them could handle. "We could head west," Samuel said finally. "California, maybe. Start fresh where nobody knows our names." Elena was quiet for a long moment. "You'd do that, give up your life here for me?" Samuel looked down at her, seeing not the broken woman he'd found bleeding in the dust, but someone stronger, fiercer, more beautiful than she'd ever been allowed to believe. What life before you? I was just going through the motions, hauling freight from town to town, like a ghost. She turned to face him fully, her hand finding his cheek. I love you, Samuel Hayes. I don't know when it happened or how, but I do. The words hit him like a physical blow, so unexpected and precious that for a moment he couldn't speak. When he found his voice, it came out rough with emotion. I love you too, Elena Martinez, more than I thought possible. She kissed him, then soft and tentative at first, then with growing confidence. Samuel tasted salt, her tears, or his, he couldn't tell. All he knew was that this woman in his arms had become his world worth fighting for, worth dying for, worth living for. When they broke apart, Elena's eyes were bright with tears, and something else, hope perhaps, or the first stirrings of a future neither had dared imagine. California, she said, testing the word. I've never seen the ocean. Neither have I. She smiled, the first truly joyful expression Samuel had seen from her. Then we'll see it together. 6 weeks later, Samuel guided their wagon down a winding mountain road toward the distant shimmer of the Pacific Ocean. Elena sat beside him on the driver's bench, her hair loose in the salt breeze, one hand resting on the slight curve of her belly where their child grew. The pregnancy had been a surprise, discovered when Elena's morning sickness began just days after they left the cabin behind. But surprise had quickly turned to joy, then determination. This child would be born, free-loved, wanted everything its parents had been denied. There, Samuel said, pointing toward the horizon where blue met blue. The ocean. Elena caught her breath. She'd imagined it 1,000 times during their journey west, but the reality dwarfed every dream. Endless water stretched to the horizon, waves rolling endlessly toward shore, with a sound like distant thunder. It's beautiful, she whispered. They made camp that night on a bluff overlooking the sea, the wagon positioned to block the worst of the wind. Samuel built a fire while Elena prepared their simple meal, both of them moving with the easy familiarity of people who'd learned to depend on each other completely. Any regrets? Samuel asked as they sat watching the stars emerge above the water. Elena considered the question seriously. About leaving, about the men we killed, about this? She gestured to encompass their modest camp, their uncertain future, the child growing within her. Any of it? She shook her head slowly. The only regret I have is that it took so long to find you. All those years of thinking I was nothing, that I deserved whatever cruelty the world handed out. I wish I'd known better. Samuel took her hand, marveling as he always did at how perfectly it fit in his. We found each other when we needed to. That's what matters. And our baby will grow up knowing they're loved. Elena added, her other hand resting protectively on her stomach. Knowing they matter. Damn right they will. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the waves roll endlessly toward shore. Tomorrow they would reach the town of Monterey, where Samuel hoped to find work and Elena could rest properly before their child arrived. It wouldn't be easy, strangers in a new place with little money and no connections. But they'd survived worse together. Samuel, Elena said softly, yeah, thank you for stopping on that road, for fighting for me, for believing I was worth saving when I'd stopped believing it myself. Samuel turned to face her fully, his weathered features soft in the firelight. You saved yourself, Elena. I just gave you the chance. She kissed him then, tender and full of promise. When they broke apart, Elena's eyes were bright with tears, but they were happy tears, perhaps the first she'd ever shed from joy rather than sorrow. The fire burned lower as they held each other beneath the vast star-filled sky. Below them, the ocean sang its eternal song, waves carrying away the past and bringing in the future, one tide at a time. In the distance, lights twinkled in the windows of Monterey, welcoming them to their new life. Whatever challenges awaited, they would face them together, Samuel and Elena, and soon their child, a family forged in hardship and tempered by love. The prairie where their story began lay hundreds of miles behind them now, but the lessons learned there would travel with them always. That cruelty could be overcome by kindness, that the broken could be made whole, and that sometimes salvation came not from God or government or the goodness of strangers, but from the simple act of refusing to let someone die alone. As the stars wheeled overhead and the ocean kept its patient vigil, Samuel and Elena slept peacefully in each other's arms, dreaming of the life they would build together in this new land by the sea. The story was complete. The road that had begun with blood and despair now led to hope and new beginnings. And in the gentle rhythm of Elena's breathing, in the steady beat of Samuel's heart, In the promise of the child, they would soon hold the future stretched out before them like the endless Pacific, vast, beautiful, and full of infinite possibility.